There are moments in life when we search endlessly for complicated solutions to our problems, when we bury ourselves in medical advice, modern supplements, and long lists of scientific recommendations. And yet somewhere deep within us, there is a faint whisper that reminds us that answers often lie in the simplest things. The old remedies, the ones passed down through time, the ones that smell like a warm kitchen, handwritten notes, and the voice of someone who loved us before we even knew how to love ourselves. In my case, that whisper has always carried me back to Grandma's recipes, not only for food, but for living for healing, for soothing the body and uplifting the spirit when the weight of the world seemed too heavy to bear. I still remember the way she would prepare her little remedies not as a doctor prescribing medicine, but as a woman who had lived long enough to know that every leaf, every root, and every spice carried within it a story older than any of us. A memory of the earth that could restore balance to the human body when we had drifted too far from its rhythms. Whenever I came to her complaining of fatigue or sadness or the heaviness that often accompanies long days of worry, she would never scold me, never lecture me about what I should be doing differently. Instead, she would invite me into her kitchen, her sanctuary, a place where the shelves were lined with jars of herbs, dried fruits and spices, each labeled in her delicate handwriting, each holding within it a fragment of her wisdom. It was in that kitchen that I learned about the intricate relationship between what we consume and how we feel, between the foods that touch our tongues and the moods that shape our days. She would tell me that energy and mood are not two separate things, as many people believe, but partners in an endless dance, each influencing the other, each capable of lifting or dragging the other down. If you have no energy, she would say, your mood collapses, and if your mood is dark, your body grows heavy, as though it has forgotten how to move freely. She believed that restoring harmony meant feeding both the body and the soul at once, never neglecting either, never assuming that one could thrive while the other was starved. Among her countless remedies, there was one in particular that stood out, one so simple, so seemingly insignificant, that I once dismissed it as old-fashioned nonsense, only to discover later that it held within it a truth both scientific and poetic. She always kept a small jar of crystallized ginger on the counter, little golden cubes coated in sugar, glistening like pieces of sunlight trapped in glass. Whenever someone in the family felt weak, dizzy, nauseous, or overwhelmed by exhaustion, she would reach for that jar, as though it were a treasure chest, and she would insist, chew, crystallized ginger, slowly, patiently, allowing its warmth and fire to spread through your mouth and into your body. At first I resisted. To me, ginger was far too strong, too sharp, too fiery to be considered comforting. But she would only smile knowingly, pressing the little cube into my palm, reminding me that medicine is not always meant to be sweet or gentle, that sometimes healing comes with a sting, a spark, a fire that awakens what has fallen asleep within us. And so I obeyed, placing the piece in my mouth, biting into it reluctantly, only to feel an almost immediate shift, a surge of warmth spreading through my chest, a kind of clarity returning to my mind, as though the fog that had clouded me had begun to dissolve. She explained it simply, in the language of a woman who had lived her life close to the earth. Ginger, she said, was a root that carried the fire of the earth within it, a spice that could chase away the coldness of fatigue, the dull ache of sadness, the unsettling waves of nausea that often came when the stomach and the spirit were unsettled. To her, it was not only about the body, but about reminding the soul that it still had strength, that it still carried warmth, that it still deserved to rise. She never once used the word antioxidants or circulation, or any of the terms that doctors might employ, and yet her wisdom held the same truth that science would later confirm. For her, the remedy was not only physical, but symbolic. When you chewed that fiery sweetness, you were, in a way, saying yes to life again, agreeing to rise from the heaviness that had pinned you down, agreeing to meet the day with renewed strength. She would say it directly. For nausea and lack of energy, chew crystallized ginger, and remember that even in bitterness there is healing. Even in fire there is comfort. Years later, long after she had passed, I found myself sitting alone at my own kitchen table, weary from work, drained from the endless cycle of obligations, responsibilities, and the quiet loneliness that sometimes lingers in adulthood. I remembered her words, her gestures, the way she would gently press that little cube into my hand, and I realized how deeply I missed the warmth of her presence. My pantry, modern and efficient, was filled with neatly packaged goods, vitamins in plastic bottles, and energy drinks that promised vitality but left me restless and hollow. And then, as though guided by memory itself, I walked to the small spice section, found a bag of crystallized ginger tucked away behind jars of cinnamon and turmeric, and placed a piece on my tongue. The taste was immediate and familiar, sweet and fiery at once, almost overwhelming, and yet it carried with it something far greater than flavor. It carried the echo of her voice, the weight of her wisdom, the reminder that care is not only about curing symptoms, but about remembering the small rituals that connect us to those who came before us. As I chewed, I felt not only energy returning, but mood lifting, not only nausea fading, but a sense of connection rekindling, as though through that fiery sweetness I was once again seated at her kitchen table, listening to stories absorbing lessons that I had once taken for granted. In that moment, I understood something profound. Remedies like these are not just about the body. They are about memory, about continuity, about carrying forward the voices and traditions of those who lived before us. Every time I chew a piece of crystallized ginger, now I do so not only for relief, but as an act of remembrance, as a way of honoring her and reminding myself that wisdom often comes wrapped in simplicity, waiting for us to notice it when we are ready. Over time, I began to share this with others. Friends who came to me tired, overwhelmed, or restless would hear me repeat my grandmother's words, and I would offer them a small piece of ginger as though passing on a secret treasure. I would watch their faces shift from surprise to curiosity to recognition of that same warmth, that same fire. And I knew then that I was not only helping them find relief, but also continuing a legacy, a thread of knowledge woven through generations. And so when I think about healing, about energy and mood, about the ways we try to restore balance in our frantic modern lives, I always return to the same lesson. Sometimes the solution is not in what is new, but in what has endured, in the wisdom carried quietly through kitchens, gardens, and family tables. Grandma's recipes may never appear in medical journals. They may never be recognized by pharmaceutical companies, but they remain alive in the hearts of those who remember that healing is not only about science, but about love, about care, about the way a simple act, like chewing crystallized ginger, can reconnect us with both our bodies and our roots. Because in the end, it is not only about nausea or lack of energy, not only about physical symptoms, but about the way life itself often overwhelms us, leaving us dizzy, tired, and uncertain. And in those moments, what we need most is not another quick fix, but a reminder of the fire within us, the sweetness that can still be found, and the voices that still guide us if we are willing to listen.